think it's now time to start again. So my name is Karin Valin. I'm the managing director of SME, which is located in the southeast of France and which will be soon celebrated its 13th anniversary. So we are quite proud about this. We are basically providing studies, research, and consultancies in different fields. And we are basically trying to connect research to innovation and to markets. And in my capacity of community building and dissemination leader of the Social-IST project, I'm very proud to share this quite short session. We just have 35 minutes to give you a very good overview of the Social-IST project output and outcomes at the same time. To do so, I have the pleasure to introduce you to our three speakers for this session. The very first one is Daniele Miorandi, that you know already, who is leading the Inspire team at the CreateNet Research Center in Italy. I've heard as well that you recently celebrated your 10th anniversary of research and innovation as well. And who is the coordinator of the Social-IST project. Our second speaker for today will be David Robertson from the University of Edinburgh in the UK. And Iacopo Carreras, who is the technical group leader of CreateNet as well in Italy. So the four of us are part of the Social-IST consortia. I'm afraid I will have to be quite tough with time. And Daniele, it's not because you are the boss that you have extra time to make your presentation. So you will have 5 minutes sharp, and Iacopo and Dave to present the white paper and the roadmap. They will have about 15 minutes each, and we will leave the question at the end of the session. So Daniele, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Karin. It's me again. I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to go very fast through presentation. So as was mentioned, this event is actually the final one of the Social-IST project. So we thought it was actually wise to tell you a little bit more about what the project is about. So Social-IST is an FP7 project funded by the Future and Emerging Technologies Unit. It's a specific support action, a small project, which has the focus of catalyzing interdisciplinary collaborations and organizing consultations of multidisciplinary research around the theme of social collective intelligence. And you've already seen 3 keynote presentations, so I guess right now the notion of social collective intelligence is getting clear. You can look at it as an area in terms of research, but you can look at it also as a new form of systems, hybrid systems in which humans, individuals and collectives and machine cooperate in a coordinated way to solve challenging problems. Few words about the project. It's a very small one. 3 partners, CreateNet, which is coordinating, University of Edinburgh, which is leading the scientific investigations, and Sigma Orionis, which is leading the dissemination and marketing activities. It's actually short also in terms of duration. The project started 1 year ago. What you see now is the final event of the project, because the project is officially closing at the end of this month. In terms of objectives, the project had 3 main objectives. The first one, to enhance the development of a new research community able to formulate roadmap and approaches for social collective intelligence. Second, to identify and perform an in-depth analysis of what are the key research challenges from both an ICT and a social science perspective that social collective intelligence is putting forward. And last but not least, to assess the expected impacts that future EU-scale initiatives on social collective intelligence can have. And when I'm talking about impacts, I'm talking about impacts on science, technology, society, and economy. In terms of activities, the project started with a quite in-depth desktop search performed by partners, trying to understand what are the trends in technology, society, and economy that are kind of constituting the landscape for the emergence of this new theme of social collective intelligence. We have been running 2 interactive workshops with scientific panel members. The project put together a scientific panel with more than 20 people, chaired by Professor Fausto Giunchiglia, who we will see later on. And basically, we have been running these 2 workshops to gather inputs from our scientific panel members, our experts, on what their idea is on which directions research in this field should be taken. We are running an open web survey to which, of course, you are all welcome to contribute. You can see the link on the slides to kind of open up this to the voice of the community at large, providing means for everybody, not just our experts, to contribute to shape the research agenda in this field. And last but not least, we have been running a number of social media activities. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and we have a YouTube channel on which you can find more than 15 interviews with experts and on which you will see also the registrations that we are taking today. In terms of outcome, there are 3 main outcomes of this project, 2 concrete, tangible ones, and a third one which is a little bit more immaterial, let me say. First one is a white paper which addresses the research challenges for research in social collective intelligence, which will be the subject of a next presentation given by Dave Robertson. We also drafted a roadmap for future FET initiatives in the field, including an assessment of which are the highest impact application areas in which research in this field should focus, and coming up also with proposals in terms of methodology that should be followed to run projects in the field. Last but not least, raising awareness in Europe of this new topic, of the kind of challenges and opportunities that lie within the field of social collective intelligence, and foster the creation of a multidisciplinary community active on the theme. This concludes my presentation. I hope I was within time, and I'm ready to leave the floor to Dave, who will introduce the white paper. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Daniele. Just to mention that this is not only a USB stick, but you have the 2 papers that will be presented by Dave and Iacopo in the 2 upcoming presentations in it. Dave?
Okay, thanks Daniele, and thanks everybody for coming along for this. So I'm doing the presentation on the research document, but really I'm just a mouthpiece for the various people who contributed to it. So quite a lot of the people who contributed to it are in the audience now, so thanks very much for your contributions. I think it was quite a difficult document to do, because it's very broad, it's very eclectic, but still we want it to have some focus. So one of the things that I think is important about this in getting that kind of focus, it's difficult to do. And it's difficult to do because I think, I've seen this quite a lot over the years in computing. What you tend to find in computing, my theory of how things go in computing research is they tend to boil a little bit, so you'll have areas that seem very distinct for a while, because they've got a certain kind of gravity for whatever reason. And then after a while, they start to do whatever they've done. They've done the main things they have to do, and they turn into other areas, and those areas do the same thing. So the whole firmament tends to boil a little bit. And so this diagram is meant to give you an idea of the sort of boiling process that I think is going on here. This is not a very good diagram from a scientific point of view, but every time I use it, it seems to be very effective for introducing this kind of talk. So it's not very quantitative, but it gives you the idea. So the idea here is, if you look at this diagram, there's really 2 axes. One axis is the social intensiveness, how much you're really harnessing society in some coherent way to do something. Of course, that's very, very difficult to measure. I couldn't give you a unit for it, but just imagine, this is a cartoon. And on the other axis, there's how intensively you're really pushing our current knowledge about computation. You're taking the computational infrastructure and pushing that. And for most people in this audience, have been spent some time on one axis or the other. You've been really trying to understand how social systems work and pushing those, or you've been really trying to work on computer systems and pushing those. And it feels very different to do those kinds of research. Nevertheless, lots of progress has been made. Okay, so we're not developing this from absolutely nothing at all. And so if you imagine these axes, there's some systems that we've built that are kind of on this side of the social scale, but not very computationally complex. Okay, so Facebook or any of these other, actually there was a brilliant talk at the very beginning that Jeff Mulligan gave, describing an awful lot of those kind of social computation systems that already exist. And they're great, and they're very effective, but in some ways they're not very computationally complex. And the sort of things that you might expect to be able to do with those systems from a kind of traditional computer science point of view, like compose them to form a bigger one that you had some predictability over its behavior, actually is really hard to know how to do that with those systems. So somehow they're effective but not very complex from a computer science point of view. On the other hand, if you look at conventional computation, we can build really quite complicated things with really quite a lot of structure, but they don't tend to engage society very much. So the diagrams are tended to convey that. And then we're interested in that space in the middle. So whatever is in there, and we don't know what it is yet, but we'd like to occupy that space. And then the other thing I like about this diagram, I used to have another variant that wasn't quite like this. The other thing about this one is for these two blue bits, then there's already some work going on. You can say there are some systems, some points of contact. And the real issue is how do we go from the things we currently know into that kind of space. So the approach that we took when we were doing the research analysis was to think not if we could have some marvelous new system that we could just take a completely clean sheet of paper and construct from nothing, what would that look like? But try and think from where we are, how would we try and get there? And we took two axes. One was on the social side, and one was on the technical side. So all I'm going to really do for the rest of this talk is to go through two diagrams. One is going to be talking about what it looks like from this side, and the other one is going to be talking about what it looks like from this side, starting from where we currently are conventionally, and then pushing out into that space. And the diagram is intended to convey that. So some of you may have seen these diagrams before because they're in the documents. And the documents we've tried to pare them down as far as we could so that they're very, very quick and easy for you to read. So that's the intention. All I'll do is explain a little bit of that, and then hopefully that encourages you to read these. Okay. So here's the first one. And the way you read this diagram is, here's where we currently are, the way we currently approach the problem, and then there are a number of axes. And as you go towards the ends and tips of these axes, then you're pushing more towards social collective intelligence, social computation, whatever name you want to give this kind of activity. And of course, these axes are not independent. So if you push on one, maybe you also need to push on the other, and so on and so forth. So you will make your own connections. So this is quite a sophisticated thing we're trying to capture here. And absolutely no claim that we've captured it well. Absolutely no claim that I actually understand all of this very well. In fact, for this particular diagram, actually Stuart Anderson up at the back did most of the work. He should be standing here talking about it, but I get the job of doing that. So what I'm going to do is just very quickly go through some of these axes. There's more information in the documentation if you want to pick these up, or for almost quite a few people in this audience would have something to say about how these were constructed. So let's go through. First one, data. Okay, and remember here we're thinking about this from the social perspective, not from the technical perspective. There's another diagram that's going to come up in my second and last slide talking about that. So data, what do you do with data conventionally? You hold it close. You think about provenance, where it came from, but you try and think of various ad hoc mechanisms to be able to explain that using whatever notions of provenance you have that you can hold close to you, and that's not going to work very well on the social scale because we want society somehow to construct that, whatever that means. Okay. So all these things really, at the end here, they're almost like little challenges to the community. What would that mean then? Curation. We want to be able to curate data, of course, because we want to be able to maintain it, to refine it, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of it about, and actually there's an awful lot of it about now that is socially derived, and because it's socially derived, very, very low veracity data. So that's one of the big driving forces for this kind of activity. Curation, often corporate. If you use Facebook for that kind of data curation, congratulations, you're their product, you're part of the corporate effort for Facebook and many other systems like this. Could we make more sense of that socially? How? Governance. Governance at the moment is often done through legal governance and nationally. But if these systems start to get big, which is the ambition, if we want to inhabit this more complex space, then we want these things to be somehow polycentric. Many, many different centers of government, internet scale. What does that mean? Many of these issues are well outside what you think of as traditional computer science. Cooperation. You want people to cooperate as part of these systems. Not just cooperate arbitrarily, but sometimes cooperate in quite structured ways. Well, traditional ways, you think of a workflow and you deploy it. That's what we would do. But that's not necessarily going to work in very heterogeneous societies. We need things that are much more flexible, that provide looser constraints. Scale. We cope with scale pretty well with lots of systems. We're pretty good at doing global networking. We think of these massively distributed systems. But it's very difficult inside those systems to get much idea of the social structure, which may or may not be fractal. We don't know. That's a kind of just convenient word to use for saying it might have structure that has some replication at different levels of granularity. Expertise. We want to actually get, somebody was saying earlier, we need people to understand how to use the systems, what they're for, what's the best to do there. Traditional approaches, train them. Well, that's very hard on these kinds of scales. Somehow, there has to be some notion of co-production for these. People have to train each other, have to help other people to be able to use these kinds of systems. Ownership. Who owns what? Lots of the things that you're producing have value. How do you protect IPR? How do you protect ownership? Well, legally, often. But that may not work at this scale. How do you do things which are more open in terms of those kinds of issues, but you still have the right kind of protection? Responsibility, often rule-based in conventional systems. We'd like responsibility to be developed in a more bottom-up way, something that was rather more democratic than just being imposed. Where do you expect these things to have an impact? Well, actually, quite often you don't really know, at least not when you start, because the impact may be at different scales. Okay, so, and actually that will lead on to some other interesting technical issues later when we get on to the next diagram. Performance, compliance. How do you know that what you're doing is within some kind of safe envelope when it's in operation? Conventional way is try and build that into your software somehow. It's rule-based. It's set by the engineers. We wouldn't expect that to be true for a lot of these systems. We would somehow expect performance and compliance to be emergent, whatever you take that to mean. And I just spent probably, I actually don't know how many minutes, but Daniele will tell me, probably about 5 minutes. Okay, so talking about things that really weren't very much directly to do with computing at all. Actually, and so that's quite important. So that's part of the basis for this. And now I'll talk a little bit about things that are closer, I think, at least in the way I'm describing the computing. But actually, these connect. I'm not going to try and be too clever in this talk, but a lot of these, if you look at the tips of the arrows there, they do connect in a kind of slightly approximate way into some of the social things we described before. But I'm not going to get clever about that. I'll leave that to you. Thanks to Martin Golumbic for trying to make that connection. We did that. So if you look around, roughly the same sort of territory, but we flip it around and we look at it from the computer science point of view. Data. What do we? Oh, let me see. Oops, sorry. Yes. Okay. Data. Again, we're deploying on a social scale. Again, moving from data ownership. Typically, we solve problems to do with, so here we were looking at provenance, remember, on the previous slide. We worry about provenance as a thing that's established corporately. You have provenance rules and so on that enable you to say something about where data came from. Actually, data ownership in these systems might be rather more personal. So it's healthcare data, it may be personal healthcare data you're dealing with, rather than in the UK National Health Service data. What do you do about ownership in those kinds of systems? How do you have systems that help you retain ownership of your data, without destroying some of the aspects of privacy and provenance that you possess. Programming. Conventional view is a sort of centralized programming model. The systems may not be centralized, but the programming surely is. You build a system, you know the engineers, they build it, they deploy it. For a lot of these kinds of systems, the programming itself may be distributed. You would like to have people who could influence what the programs are if you're running the systems, and the people and the engineering itself is decentralized. That's typically hard to do. Connections. We like computer networks. We know as computer scientists, we know about them. You can kind of know where you are. But here often the social network is the big thing. And it's not just the computer network is a social network, so the computer network linking in to the human social network. And how does that synergy work? Engagement. For these programs. Oh yeah, okay. For these systems, for engagement, when you run a normal program, you would normally expect people to engage because they operate more or less like subroutines in your program. For social systems, somehow they have to be incentivized. You have to have systems of incentives that make people actually engage with the programs that you write. Context. How do you disambiguate the things that people are saying in your systems? Conventional systems, things are rigged so that that is essentially predetermined. You operate in the context that the engineers set for your system. For social systems, somehow that has to be emergent socially. The context in which I understand something that other people in my social group have said has to somehow be developed through that operation of that social group. Trust is a huge issue. So how do you trust in these large systems that are socially derived the information that you receive, particularly as they become more advanced, and some of the information that is derived is maybe not direct, but obtained through some aggregation of the data that came from the rest of the society. How does that actually follow through? Security. How do you make people feel that they are protected against the system? How do you make people who write systems in this sort of environment feel that they can write systems that are protected against the person? So that currently is done through closing things off. But the push here is towards opening up these systems. So how do you reconcile those tensions? Properties. I'm very accustomed to writing programs, defining properties, checking those properties. That's what I do when I build software. And so I do that sort of static program analysis before I deploy things, if I feel like I'm doing a good job. That's not going to happen very easily here because a lot of these properties are in the social network. And that takes me to my last one, just on time, which is requirements. I used to spend a lot of time in requirements engineering community, a great place to work, huge source of cost in software development. Most of the analysis is done pre-deployment traditionally, not with these kinds of systems, because most of the things you want to know are post-deployment when you run them. So a very different style of engineering. So what I've done in a kind of slightly sketchy way, jumping around a lot, and I did have to give you a shopping list because there were an awful lot of these things that came up and I didn't really want to miss any of them, is whiz around through the concepts that we picked up here. I hope I've given you some food for thought from that, and I'll leave the rest of the discussion to whatever happens later in the meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dave. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the Social-IST partnership has identified kind of area of competition that is, of course, still to be explored. But to do so, we must bridge between social, economic, and computational research. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. May I just ask the very first question? If it's fine with you. You presented a range of very important areas that you divided into social and technical concerns. But how do these specific areas interact as research themes?
Okay, so that's a really awkward question because it's, and Petty is reminding me that I should talk into this device. So yes, so that's a really difficult question because the interaction is so complex, as you would have seen from the diagrams. So one of the things, I think maybe the best way to, I think there's no simple answer to this question, but one of the things that we did notice, or at least I noticed when we were doing, we spent a bit of time talking really to lots of people to obtain these diagrams. One of the things that you tend to find, and there's no time to go through them all, we could do it as an exercise, but they do tend to cluster a little bit. So for example, if you take and that we tried to represent that through the diagrams. So a simple way to read the diagrams if you're looking for the interconnections between the social side and the computing side is just to map them around. As you find a bit that relates to data and you pull that across. And typically to actually make some traction, my personal view would be that actually you need to go from both sides. And you can try to push out together. Where it gets complex is what I was saying before. You push on one, I don't know, you push on data ownership from corporate to personal, then you must push on trust, because probably it's not going to work otherwise. And as you push on that one, there's one behind it on the social side that probably you're also pushing on as well, because you have to bring the social dimension with you too. So I think doing research in this area is not something that's easy to do just by picking one of these up and saying, I'll do something on, I don't know, data provenance, and I'll push on that without looking across at the rest. Because if you do that, all you've got is a result in data provenance, and 10 chances to 1, that's never going to help you build one of these large and more ambitious social computation systems, at least not directly. That doesn't mean that you have to have huge, ginormous projects, but it does mean you have to link across.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a very lengthy answer.
No, that's thank you so much. I would be in favor of asking the floor if they have a couple of questions to Dave. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I think your analytical scheme is fantastic, but coming down from to reality, can you use this analytical scheme for a practical question, for a practical concrete project?
That's a really good question.
Just to give you an example. Well, I'm connected with Manchester University, so we are a little bit competitors.
No. I was in Manchester earlier this week.
Yeah, but I'm Belgium, I'm Flemish. And I just got today the good news that we are selected in the AAL program with our consortium, so
good.
I'm in a happy mood. But anyway, now I want to go further, and I would like to do I would like to see in Europe what's happening in the field. We are going to do a practical application, which is concretely in telemonitoring, wireless online monitoring in real time of cardio, diabetes people, anybody. And we measure anything, and all is measured in real time from the body and going to portals and to databases in real time, wireless and online. So what I would like to do with your scheme is to look what's all going on in this field in Europe, or even in the world, checking and using your Stramin to see how I can make big jumps in the future and to stay ahead technologically compared with other countries.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a really good question. I have two answers to it, if you don't mind indulging me for a little bit. So the first answer is, I think for some of these issues, actually I'm going to answer a question you didn't ask, but it's important. I think for some of these issues, I think they're common mode. So the example that you mentioned in telecare is exactly the same sort of example that we also have funding for, and certainly in Scotland. Stuart sitting behind you is leading that initiative. I think it's probably there will be other people in this audience. I mean, I think possibly Trento and so on and so forth. Actually, common mode. They're thinking about the same things, and the reason why is because there are big social drivers that aren't on that diagram that are actually pushing the research. It's the reason why these things start to boil in computer science. There'll be some big driver that pushes it in some direction, and then all of these other things assemble around it. So that's not answering the question you asked. To answer the question you asked, is this thing a useful thing for analyzing that? And I think as unsatisfactory. We don't know, because we just made it up. I would like to think so. I don't think it would be a very good specific management tool, because I think for individual projects it gets a bit more fine-grained than that. Maybe it's helpful for people to start thinking about what the more fine-grained ones would be like. So I wouldn't be too ambitious for these diagrams themselves, but I think they're a good aide-memoire for the things that you might, there might be interesting concepts that you then refine for a specific project. Yes?
Okay, last and short question to Dave, please. And short answer, Dave.
Yeah, I was really hoping
Okay,
long
tell me
answer,
when
but the question will be short then. It seems like quite a few of these axes are challenges that also are important to other kind of systems, not only social collective intelligence systems like data ownership and programming. It's sort of challenges that is important for any kind of internet-based system, really. Which of the axes would you say are particularly important to identify social collective intelligence challenges or social collective intelligence systems?
Yeah, I'll give you two answers again, but much shorter, because they're very similar to the previous one. So same answer again for the first one. I think it's common mode. So if you take data, right? So data is just a huge driver. And then you say, what can we do about low veracity in data? What can you do about the fact that most of the data that actually will be out there will be socially derived data? You don't have a choice, because that's where it's all coming from. And then an obvious antidote to that is, well, we'll try and use society itself to help make the data veracity problem smaller. So then you'd be interested in that just because you're interested in that aspect of data. But that's not the only problem that you're interested in, because you couldn't build that system that would help if you didn't build the social collective system to do it. So then the second part of the quick answer to your question is, what makes it special? What makes it special is the particular way that you jointly push out in all of these. If I take any one individually, then it actually doesn't look too special. I'd say maybe the requirements one looks a little bit special, but you could say the same about the requirements one just for systems which have to be deployed very rapidly. So each individual one, I would claim no novelty for it. We didn't invent a new dimension. Actually, we didn't try to invent a new dimension. That would be bad, because that would be operating against the grain of any of the communities. But the special bit comes for how you push out against them jointly. And so then that would be a much, much longer answer. Actually, probably not an answer I could personally give, because that's for the community to find out, I'd say.
Thank you very much, Dave. Let's try to give 5 minutes at the end of the session so that you can receive more questions.
Fine.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Iacopo, the floor is yours. So you are going to introduce you to the Social-IST roadmap for high-impact application areas, right?
Okay, so thank you, Karin, for the introduction. And So thank you, Karin, for the introduction. So what I'm going to do now is to report on the work that we have done in Social-IST in identifying those application areas that we do believe will be mostly impacted by a social collective intelligence approach. But first of all, let me tell you why we have done this, and in particular why in the context of an FET project, so Future Emerging Technologies, that, as we heard this morning, is traditionally targeting long-term research for which application areas are not necessarily linked too much, at least not as much as for collective intelligence, social collective intelligence, to science and research. And there are basically two reasons for this. The first one is that social collective intelligence starts and ends from application areas. It starts because it refers to collectives of users which are teaming up together, start to collaborate in order to achieve certain objectives and tackle certain challenges which are motivated by given application area. But at the same time, this application area is what will ultimately benefit from whatever is being produced by this collective of users. So the intelligence that is being produced is then going to augment this application area. So in this sense, we say that social collective intelligence starts and ends on application domains. And the second reason is that we have all witnessed the great progress in information and communication technologies. So through ICT, it's very easy nowadays to start to collaborate independent from where we are, who we are, and what is our background. And the most tangible effect of all this is big data. So big data is produced by these loose interactions of collectives of users, is produced in an incredible amount. Now, the problem is how to make sense, how to make sense of this data, how to extract knowledge, and how to extract intelligence. So this is what I call social sense-making of big data through social collective intelligence. And the only way to do this, to achieve this, is by working in close synergy with application areas. Application areas motivates people to work together, which produce data, and require application areas in order to extract knowledge and intelligence. And this is actually what we want. So given this motivation, in Social-IST, we have been studying different application areas, at least the one that we do believe will be mostly affected. This has been done with the process that Daniele was mentioning before, with consultation meetings, by asking feedback to the panel of experts. And through this process, we have came out with 6 areas that we do believe could be strategic and mostly affected by this approach. These areas are learning, energy, science and innovation, healthcare and well-being, work and mobility and transport. Now, in the following, I will spend a few words on 2 of them, while you can refer to the document in the USB stick for additional details on the remaining ones. So let me start with what we call the future of work. So it's a fact that Europe nowadays is facing tremendous challenges in the sphere of work. And in particular, the organization of work is rapidly evolving in order to keep the pace of a higher competition, which is due to a higher globalization, which is now worldwide, an increased speed of innovation. So the new mantra, the new business mantra is becoming innovator perish, customers which are more and more demanding, and finally, the recruitment of talent and knowledge, which is becoming more and more difficult. Now, all this is, of course, affecting the way people start to work together, the way people share and create knowledge, and more importantly, the way people run innovation cycles. And in particular, companies, in order to keep up with this trend, cannot any longer manage and run innovation internally. So outside innovation is becoming a new way to run, for major enterprise, to run innovation in a sustainable way in order to create and develop new products. And of course, social collective intelligence, thanks to its ability of harnessing the knowledge of an incredible large amount of people which are distributed globally, can play a major role in this. And of course, this will have a strong impact. Innovation cycle will be shortened by leveraging this outside innovation process. Companies and enterprise can actually reduce the cost and the burden of innovation. Innovation will be spontaneous. So it's something that not necessarily will be planned from a top down, but will simply emerge by leveraging this knowledge, the knowledge of people. People which will collaborate to collectively advance art, science, and technology in creative and, of course, profitable ways. And this profitable is linked to the third impact, which is on the labor market. So we will see the creation of new forms of organization, virtual organization, where the physical presence will be occasional, and where knowledge and talent can be recruited on a global scale. So now let me come to the second area, which is what we call the future of science and innovation. Well, I think that many of the people in this room probably find themselves in this area. And the question here is how to tackle the multidisciplinarity, scale, and complexity problems that future innovation is facing nowadays. Now, it's a fact that scientific problems cannot be tackled any longer by single individual or single institutions. And also in this case, social collective intelligence can play a role, leveraging this distributed network of people, citizens. So now experiments will no longer happen only in the laboratories of top-notch academic institutions or in laboratories of high-tech companies. People will actively participate to science, and probably the most well-known examples of this is Foldit. Foldit is a multiplayer online game where people, by playing the game, contributed to the unveiling and prediction of the protein structures. And the resulting paper, which was published in Nature, was featuring 75,000 names, so all the people that play the game. So this is just an example of how things are evolving in science and innovation, and how things can change. And of course, also this will have an impact on cost and efficiency. So research can now leverage and can scale up with the power of people, with the knowledge of people, which can be recruited at a very large scale. And we have been talking a lot about citizens, how to engage citizens. Now, citizens can become an active component and resource of this process, and they can become more participative of science and on the results that science will be producing. So where we are today in terms of social collective intelligence, which are the main limitations? Well, the first and main limitation is fragmentation. I think this has already been stressed during the previous talks. Fragmentation is on a horizontal level and vertical level. At the vertical level, it refers to the fact that social collective intelligence is by design extremely multidisciplinary. It involves social science, computer science, legal aspects, and all these dimensions need to talk to each other if we want to achieve a major breakthrough. The second dimension is horizontal, and it refers mostly to the various initiatives which are out there, whether national, regional, or at the European level. All these initiatives do not share enough, do not share knowledge, do not share best practice, and do not share whatever they learn by experimenting. This is another dimension that we need to overcome, another limitation that we need to overcome in order to make a progress. So we don't have a magic recipe for this, but we have elaborated a few methodological recommendations for running projects in this field. The first one is that everything should be extremely experimentally driven. Experiments should happen at day zero. We are talking about systems which are rooted on people. People-centric systems cannot be developed, cannot be designed without exploring through experimental activities with people. So this is the first recommendation. The second one is taken from the startup movement. So we advocate a lean approach. Everything that is being developed should be fast and incremental. So the right way to go is to experiment with people, experiment with collectives of users, learn something, and then, of course, iterate of this. And this positive feedback loop is what will allow social collective intelligence to progress and to have a major impact on society. The third element is sustainability. So when we talk about people, collectives of users which are starting to work together, the sustainability of this is a very fundamental question. So it relates to business models. So what motivates people to work together towards a certain objective, how to engagement, how to incentivize them, and of course, ultimately, how to extract value and knowledge on whatever is being produced by these collectives of users. And this is what we refer with sustainability. The fourth element is about stakeholders, whether they're industries, large enterprise, SMEs, policymakers. So it's not possible to talk about application scenarios without having a deep involvement of stakeholders in the process from the very beginning, both from the projects and from the implementation of the projects. And they need to be a very active and participative component. And last but not least, it's about sharing and open access. This is the only way to overcome fragmentation. Whatever is being produced should be shared across the community, across different application areas, across different domains. And this is the only way to scale social collective intelligence to a higher level and to achieve a major impact on society. Perfect, on time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iacopo. So if from your presentation we understand that we are kind of a tipping point in where to progress new ways of planning and running social collective intelligence projects are required, and this can only be done through application. Is that your main message?
Yeah, application are a fundamental part of this picture.
Component,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, right. Do we have? Should we open up the floor to questions? Do we have questions? Okay, so yeah.
I really enjoyed this talk and the previous talk by Dave, but it seemed to me that we're being asked to not just to advance on one dimension, but to be advanced on many dimensions, whose pursuit may be in tension with each other. And for example, work that one of Marina's PhD students was doing on e-science showed that some kinds of ways of bringing people in through grid technologies worked, but were done in a way that had costs because people were just involved, they were playing a game. And other kinds of involvement required more investment. And it seemed that probably not all kinds of e-science will work equally well, depending on what kind of cognitive load you're putting on the participant, right. And what's at stake. So this suggests that there are trade-offs between scale and intensity of involvement, for example. And it seems to me that what we should really be doing is learning how best to manage those different trade-offs, rather than trying to advance on all fronts at once.
Yeah, this is a very good point. And here, the issue is that when we talk about people, I mean, people are extremely stochastic. So there's no deterministic behavior about people. And so when we plan and design these systems, typically what we do, we target the system toward a certain direction, toward a certain objective, whether it's like, I don't know, healthcare, mobility, whatever. Now, the problem is that every single person has many facets, and these facets could be the trigger to push in one direction or another. And the problem, and this is what we also suggest for like future initiatives in the field. The problem is that you need to experiment. You need to experiment with people. You need to run experiments very fast because the first try could be completely wrong. Then you need to learn. It's important to learn on any initiative in this field, on any project that should have fast learning curves. And then you need to iterate. You need to find the right balance between, as you said, the brain cycles. Some people call it brain cycles that people need to put like for participating in this kind of initiatives or these projects or systems versus what will be the benefit from them. So incentives is another very important topic, where incentives is not simply monetary. Incentives could be simply like recognition, could be simply creating awareness of what you're doing in your community. There will be many, many dimensions, and every single dimension is specific to a single individual. So this is like a plethora of dimensions that should be addressed at the same time and should be studied, explored through a very strong experimentally driven approach.
Okay, sir. Yes.
I hope Sigma Orionis pays me well for putting all the questions. Now, I have, first of all, a question in the sense that is what you are doing complementary to the actual tendency, SAS and all the others, to come from unstructured data to structured data, to be used to streamline medical research and whatever. Is this complementary to what you are doing? And secondly, when I see your presentation, I think you have a huge working area here in Brussels because so many billions have been spent, especially if I look in e-health, 1.8 billion, and everybody is working here, there, and there, and there. Nobody knows very much from each other except the guys from your consortium. No one makes any effort to sit together for consortia in order to come together to solutions that beat the Americans and other competitors. I mean, using your idea structure would be ideal to present to Mr. Van Rompuy and tell him, look, you have to make a great plan in order to that all the billions spent on research come together and make something out of it concretely, applicably, and competitive to the rest of the world.
So yeah, these are the kind of conclusion that we also wanted to deliver with this presentation. So coming to the first question that you made is about this attempt of structuring data and so on by IBM and many others. Of course, this is related to the last point that I was making. It's about the openness and the sharing of knowledge. So in this field, since it's so diverse, involves so many different domains, of course it's important to share, and for sharing you need to kind of standardize at least a few things. You need to replicate things, and if you want to replicate, you need to standardize a bit. But just the basic mechanism, because then whatever is being produced by these systems cannot be standardized because it's completely unknown. You experiment and you measure what is coming out, but you cannot standardize what is going to come out because that's the real value and the knowledge that we want to get. And on the second question, this is related to the fragmentation. Fragmentation, as we have seen going through the project and the various initiatives, it's extremely high because different communities, especially soil science and computer science, have been working for too long in isolation. They have been not interacting with each other. And if this will happen, there can be a major progress in the field with a major impact on these many diverse application areas, for which the European Commission is already putting a lot of money. So definitely, this is the way we should go. We should try to come up with calls, with projects, with initiatives which overcome these barriers by design. So we need really to tackle and ask for projects which are combining, by design, different disciplines, different peoples with different backgrounds, coming from different application areas. And once we succeed in putting all these people around the table on a single project, then we will really be able to make a progress and a step forward.
Yeah, Iacopo, just to complement this question, and since we have a couple of representatives from the European Commission in the room, how what you just presented can fit into the Horizon 2020 strategy? Well,
so the strategy is not yet public. There have been quite a few consultation meetings discussing it. But from what I can see, it looks like that many of the societal challenges that Horizon 2020 will be tackling are quite aligned with those areas for which we do believe there can be a major impact of a social collective intelligence approach. So I think that what is being produced by this project will be a very interesting input for understanding how to leverage this distributed community of users, people, citizens. We have been talking a lot about citizens. Now, we need to devise mechanisms and tools for involving citizens in the development of new platforms. Well, platform is probably a bit too concrete, but to develop basically a way to involve citizens in whatever is being produced by science, they need to be participative. They need to contribute with their own will in whatever will be the roadmap of Horizon 2020.
Okay, very, very last question. We are really running late. This gentleman, yeah, thank you.
Hello, thank you. I'm Max Kralja from the European Commission Joint Research Centre. So just picking up on the two, I mean, you indicated areas of research, but there was almost a sense that you still want to design a system. And yours seems to be fast and furious, emergent. And so going back to the question for the Commission, is there a tension here? And should we go for the one project that is 100 million or for 100 projects of 1 million? And then see what grows?
My personal opinion is to go for the latter case, but there is a but this project should run in close synergy. So as I said, there is not a magic formula, so we don't know. This is also probably one of the conclusions from them. So we don't know which is the right direction to take. We know which are the ingredients. So we push in one direction and we need to release another. We know basically that people are willing to contribute. There are a few experiments out there, and they are quite successful, but just a few experiments. So since it's about experimenting, my personal take will be to go for more projects, but they need, of course, to integrate. They need to be planned and run in a cohesive way.
Sorry, we are really running late for the next session. Sorry about that, but during the lunch.
Yeah, I'm available to the lunch break.
Sorry about that. Dave, Iacopo, thank you very much for your time. Daniele, I will leave the floor to the next chair, Fausto. The floor is yours. Thank you very much to our panelists again.
There's a pen here. Is that yours? Okay, so thank you. So here's the time for the panel, and the title of the panel is Scientific Challenges in Social Collective Intelligence. And so the way it's going to go is that we're going to have like 5 minutes each for the speakers, and then question time at the end. Let me just spend 2 minutes to set up the stage of this presentation and panel. So once upon a time, there was artificial intelligence, and there was an artificial intelligence guy, and still an artificial intelligence guy. Then adaptive systems came around, then agents came around. And in all these new paradigms, we all argued, or someone argued, that there was a paradigm shift. Now, the big issue is that are we doing more of the same, maybe just a change of problem domain, or really changing the game? To me, artificial intelligence tried to change the game. It was a paradigm shift. Maybe it failed, most likely, to achieve the grand goals, but it was an attempt. Now, the question is societal social collective intelligence a paradigm shift, or is more like an incremental evolution, like adaptive systems, as I believe they were an incremental evolution? I do believe that it is a paradigm shift, but I can't find the two words like artificial intelligence which witness the paradigm shift. I'm still working on it. Once upon a time, we had the social computer. I thought I had it, but then I could not define what the social computer was, so I got stuck. But now, despite the fact that I'm not sure I understand exactly what we mean, it is a fact that there is one major change, which is that we need a new science to social collective intelligence. We need a new interdisciplinary way to think about ICT, and not only ICT, all the other sciences. Not because ICT is just going to change and like privacy, like legal aspects are going to remain the same. No, this is really, so it's not the two words, but it's the fact. So basically, why I'm saying this, because I think this is actually the main purpose of this panel, which is this, whether you call it social computer, whether you call it social collective intelligence, either you call it smart society, there is a big change that is required not only in ICT, but also in the other disciplines. And I think this panel, which is just about
scientific challenges. I think all our speakers are going to tell their own perspective on this. And so let's hear what they say. And then I hope we can discuss on this, because after all, the science is the most interesting work, and interesting for us at least, not for the others, but for some of us, yes. And so let me just start with Alois Ferscha. He's the head of the department for pervasive computing at, in Linz. And right, he was one of the pioneers in pervasive and ubiquitous computing in Europe. So Alois. You need this?
Yeah, we can put it here. So, thanks for inviting me here. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to put my point, which is the following. I think, and we can observe it, that ICT as we use it today fails to work in its original design intent just because of the sheer mass, because of the large scale that it is employed. That's the nutshell message. We have seen over the past decade work in pervasive ubiquitous computing, ambient intelligence, frame program 5 to 7. Work that does align ICT and the functioning of ICT toward certain properties of the environment. It makes it aware of the context being any information that describes the situation of an entity, like the place, the time, the temperature, whatever physical parameter would define that. That was the age of context awareness, with the capacity of grabbing social interaction patterns in software with sensors from the internet, from social software platforms. The socially aware ICT raised, and to that I want to add something today, namely social systems principles being the driving, the design and the operational reference for ICT. Question, naive question, what is the social capacity of your car, for example? Your car has been designed and built to serve you as an individual person for your safety, for your comfort, for your entertainment, for your moving from here to there. But we do know that there is 1 billion of cars now on planet in operation, along with 7 billion people, and cars are not designed to meet other cars in the roadside, in the country, in garages, in traffic. So we must totally rethink how to design systems, especially for the car, because cars are a part of a huge ensemble of other cars, and we need to design for that ensemble. What is the social capacity of your coffee maker? There is none. Your coffee maker is totally isolated from the rest of the energy consumption world out there, but it could align with some social capacity with the rest of the coffee makers in the world, so as to prevent from total blackouts in an uncoordinated switch off of coffee makers. Of course, I'm provocative here. Yes, I want to awake you. What is the social capacity of your shoes? None, because shoes are not technology rich at the moment, but they could be. We have all the technology to sense from shoes activities like mobility, like acceleration, like temperature, like sound, like everything can be captured by shoes. And mass event disasters like we saw it in the Duisburg disaster, where just because of an unpredicted social pressure of certain people in a certain place made people die. And there was no reason for them to die. It was just that they moved to a certain place and the pressure raised and raised until it was too high for some of them. We analyzed this in the socionical project and found out that there was no reason, and socially aware shoe technology could have helped people from preventing going into certain directions where a certain danger is placed. So here is the essence of my saying. We think that society has survived over 300 million years just because of the social capacity of human beings.
And these are grounded on ethics, on moral norm, on social awareness, on self-organization, on the capacity to cooperate, to negotiate, to have capacities to resolve conflicts, to make decisions, reputation, and trust. And we think that this is an inspiration to build robust, trustworthy, and adaptive ICT for the future. And that ICT is underpinned by dignity and respect and sovereignty, privacy, as is in societal settings. So my proposal is to use social systems as a principle for the design, but also for the operation of novel ICT. And I call this the socio-inspired ICT. Of course, will there be trends and emergent novel ICT systems that have to do with communication, with sensors, with electronics, smart material, also with the joint view of all these planetary nervous systems are the terms here, global participatory platforms to interact, big data, and so forth. But this also needs a side inspiration that comes from the social values of human beings, like the moral norm, like the ethics, like the value that people have in technology and in the respect of other living organisms here on planet. So I think what we need is more formal computation models for social awareness. We need technology behave at certain extents like human societies do behave, taking their social interaction principles. And we do not have algorithms, we do not have mathematical models, we do not have formal methods of proving, reasoning about social behavior yet. So I think that two categories of fundamental research are needed. One that has to do with trying to understand the social capacities, the capabilities, like social adaptiveness, cooperation, competition, conflict resolution, reputation, the attraction and repulsion principle, the flocking principle of people going together, and so forth. So this has to do much with the social capabilities. And I think this also needs, but on the other side, to better understand the cognitive capabilities. And the cognitive capabilities are just attention, perception, memory, emotion, and so forth. These two together could help to understand those things. There are cases that we are thinking about, namely, for example, for traffic, to consider collectives of vehicles as a socially interactive compound of knowledge cells. We have ideas on how reputation in society works, aside the pure unit of account and store of value, understanding of money, like social capital and cultural capital and symbolic capital. The governance of commons would be, liquid democracy would be an exercise or a case for a socially inspired ICT. And in the Sapere project, we have already studied how the information ecosystems, people that are surrounded by billions of displays, how they collect the right information at the right time to their right needs in the right moment as a value-sensitive approach to information displays. I shall be happy to discuss with you in the break research agenda items like how to empower humans with socially inspired ICT, how to be respectful with respect to the human value system, how to create formal models and computational models to build socially inspired ICT, and also discuss social architectures as they could be deployed in future coming ICT. There is a position paper on my webpage that you can read that gives you more on this. Thank you.
So we'll ask, I think you should sit there so that we can ask questions at the end, answer questions at the end. Ciro Cattuto. He is a research director in ISI, the Institute for Scientific Interchange in Torino, physics by education, and he does work in complex systems and data science lately. Ciro?
Thanks so much for having me here. As Fausto was mentioning, I'm a physicist by training, and in physics, as you know, the culture has been the culture of reductionism for a long time, to try and unravel what are the basic determinants of behaviors that we observed and try to point to elementary mechanisms for that. At the same time, the physicists were the first to recognize that there are a bunch of systems that we cannot treat in a reductionist fashion. There are systems that entangle at their heart behavioral aspects from humans and technological aspects from the infrastructure and the computational infrastructures we create. And these systems are not really designed top-down. They are not just complicated. They're complex. And by complex in physics and then in what has become the science of complex systems, we mean systems that we cannot explain at the upper level, at the phenomenological level, as a trivial consequences of the interactions of their components. So they are systems that, unlike gases, where if you know the properties of the atoms, you pretty much know what you can expect at the upper level. In this instance, the interactions are such that causality is muddled, that you cannot really tease apart what causes what because you have so many feedback loops. And if you think of many of the technological infrastructure that we have today, like on the top you have the airline transportation network, on the bottom you have just one tiny visualization of Facebook activity, all of these systems entangle at their heart the behavior of humans, which is very hard to model even today, and the digital infrastructure that supports their interaction and shapes their interaction. So you cannot really disentangle the human from the computational here. This is a challenge. It's also a huge opportunity. And this brought about a few innovations. The first one is that the linear thinking has come, is dawning. Sorry, it's not dawning, it's sunsetting actually. We can no longer think about these systems in terms of simple action-reaction, of the idea that you learn as a child that if you push a bit, you get a reaction, if you push harder, you get a stronger reaction. These systems are such that if you take out the wrong link, the entire thing collapses, right? So the reasoning about this system and the science of complex systems has brought forth the end of what we call linear thinking, and of course has changed our relationship to how we measure, evaluate, and forecast risks in these systems, right? Of course, scientifically, it also brought about a number of problems, of fundamental problems on how you infer causality. How do you understand the laws of these systems, given that you have so many feedback loops? What causes what? It's very easy, and this is, you know what big data is all about, to extract correlations, but to make the jump between correlation and causation, which means to make the jump between observing and understanding a system and being able to engineer its behavior, there lies a huge challenge. Then comes ICT. And in terms of big picture, ICT has enabled three main aspects that bring together humans and computers. The first one is that for the first time as a society, as a planet, the digital image of the world is tracking the world in real time. The two things are moving together just because so many of our systems are pervasive and we have digital records, digital tracks of our daily actions. This means that the digital image, digital records of human behavior track human behavior with unprecedented accuracy, and this is something that we can exploit for the human or we can exploit against the human. And so here lies policy and decision-making question. We can use the computational tools that have now come of age to extract signals that we use to understand these systems. For example, this is a view that you have of an hospital works by using wearable sensors. And it exposes a lot of the complexity of what's happening in there, a lot of organizational structure. This is just the beginning. Through social media, through Twitter, through Facebook, we can start to track the evolution of concepts, of ideas, of influences in our society with unprecedented accuracy. But you know this better than I do. The second thing is that our mathematical models that take the heritage from far away from the social sciences, from statistical physics, now unfold themselves, now can be simulated on very data-rich representation of the world. We can use all of this data to actually create a computational landscape in which we can perform forecasts, just like we do today weather forecast. And now the challenge, the big challenge here in terms of computer science, computational social science, and complex system science is actually to bring together this modeling and measuring capability in order to effect forecast, to create actual predictive capabilities of these systems. And I'll give you just one example. This is a recently concluded European project led by Alessandro Vespignani, which created a pretty huge success story, which is the first computational platform that actually, in a validated fashion, was able to predict the timing of a pandemic. So in this case, you use data from NASA on human population. You use commuting information at the level of individual cities. You use the entire wiring of the airline transportation network together with the state-of-the-art computational epidemic model in order to create the equivalent of weather forecast for epidemics. Okay? So now, the beauty of the systems we have today is that at the same time, we have huge validation power. We can use participatory systems in order to actually track how closely our predictions are to our worldview, and we can use this information to feed back to the systems. So and here I will conclude in 1 minute. The opportunity, the huge opportunity in my view, lies in actually the fact that complex system science, computational social science, network science, the boundaries are really getting blurred, but all of them are coming of age, finally. We start to have actual tools to think mathematically about some aspects of coupled human and technological systems. And this kind of maturity lays the groundwork to actually engineering the compositionality of human-machine systems. Just like the moment you know the physics of a part of metal, of a gear, you're able to design how you use multiple of them in order to create a machine. The moment we know the social physics, the socio-physics, the network science, you can use this kind of ingredients to actually create social machines that compose in interesting and new ways the actions of humans and machines alike. And this is the vision that I have for the future, allows new patterns for actually engineering human-machine compositionality, to really create systems that span the two systems that we understand and that we control. Of course, the stack is the stack that you imagine. You have at the bottom level the new capabilities in terms of execution, of action, and of sensing that are entailed by ICT. You have standard tools that are now come of age and are progressing at a faster than ever speed of data mining, machine learning, natural language processing, coupling with the complex system science, which is now mature. And on top of this, and this is the big question, and this is really the pie in the sky, how do we engineer out of these signals, out of these capabilities, a new kind of human-machine coordination that then has to be recentered on the human, as was pointed out earlier this morning, because in the end, what you do with this kind of machinery has to go back to the human, to decision-making, to a policy-maker, and you have to recenter this on the fact that we want to improve society. And I will close here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks to you. So Simone Huber, yeah, she's professor of computer science from Karlstad in Sweden. She's an expert in privacy. Simone?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so my talk will be about privacy, which is a basic human right, but of course it's also a key factor for success of social collective intelligence because it promotes trust. On the other hand, it's at stake because we have to collect to a large extent personal data. We have to profile different peers and to analyze knowledge, but also predict behavior, and this raises many privacy concerns. So we have to follow also certain basic privacy principles that are outlined, for instance, by the OECD privacy guidelines, but also, oops, is it like this? The European Data Protection Framework, and here I listed some basic principles which form the background, which we have to enforce either by organizational means, but also by privacy by design, and this poses many challenges. So first of all, we need informed consent, basically, as a legitimization. So data subjects have to be informed in a way that they really understand the consequences, so not only posing a privacy notice that nobody is reading and nobody is understanding. So here the European Commission and the upcoming data protection regulation also stresses transparency and easily accessible policies. And here this might also be a challenge how to get informed consent by the data subjects. Data minimization is a key principle. So the best strategy for protecting privacy is, of course, to avoid data collection, let users be anonymous, or only allow them to selectively disclose certain attributes. For instance, it might be enough that you prove that you're in a certain age group, but not reveal your exact birth date. Then purpose specification, purpose binding is very essential because the sensitivity of personal data is highly related to the purpose of use. So here we also have to guarantee the data only process data to the specified purposes. We have special rules for special categories of data that are per se very sensitive, like medical data. Transparency, also ex ante, is very important, that later the data subjects have the possibility of access to the data and also find out who has accessed the data, how the data have been processed by whom. So we have also here respective rights of the data subjects, and also appropriate security of personal data has to be guaranteed. So here the question is, how can we enforce these principles by organizational means, also by privacy by design? And we have several challenges. The first challenges I list here are actually also opportunities, because I think that social collective intelligence systems have or use a lot of technologies or concepts that can also help to promote privacy. So first of all, it is based on distribution of knowledge and data, and distribution as such can be also used to enhance privacy. For instance, there's much research now going on distributed social networks, where you distribute the personal data among different peers instead of having a central social network provider that knows everything. Then also data provenance, which was mentioned, for divided in context, could be used also for ex post transparency to provide information to data subject. Who has accessed my data? How has my data been processed? So here, if it's designed in a privacy-friendly way, it can also be used to promote the privacy principle of transparency. And also, if we profile collectives instead of individuals, we can also set up the collectives that we have anonymity, that we cannot pinpoint to individuals within these groups. So we have actually also a lot of opportunities here where we can research how certain concepts can be used also for enforcing privacy. Then, we have also a lot of privacy enhancing technologies which can be adapted for enforcing also user control for the end users. How can they keep control over their personal affairs? So one key aspect, unfortunately you cannot read it clearly, is privacy enhancing identity management, where users have the possibility to securely act under different identities and show different faces to different audiences. Privacy policy negotiation enforcement is important, that users can negotiate about their privacy policies, agree on them, and then that the policy is also securely enforced. Anonymization, pseudonymization of profiles, also selective disclosures, that users can only show parts of the attributes or characteristics of the attributes, or securely prove them, for instance with anonymous credentials. And privacy by default gets more and more important, also stressed by the European Commission in the upcoming privacy or data protection reform. So we have actually a lot of technical tools already. They have to be adapted for the context of social collective intelligence, but also we have other challenges, how to make them trusted, how to make them usable, for instance, policies, how to come up with good business models. So actually we need a lot of interdisciplinary research as well. We have already quite many good technical solutions, but I think the main challenge is to make privacy enhancing technologies also socially accepted, trusted, usable, and also economically viable. So these will be key challenges that I see in this context. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last speaker is Martin. Martin Golumbic is the founder and director of the Institute for Interdisciplinary Applications of Computer Science in IFA, and has been a contributor in the area of mathematics and AI and graph theory, whatever. Martin?
And it's nice to be the last speaker before lunch. most mathematicians spend their time thinking about tough ivory tower problems that are very tough. In a recent article in Business Week, Professor Carlson from Stanford wrote that mathematicians want to work on the deepest problems and get interesting results. Professor Carlson is one of the co-founders of a company in Palo Alto called IST that applies mathematical topology to analyze large volumes of data, in particular applications in medicine such as breast cancer. But this is only one example of how human mathematical reasoning integrates with machine intelligence. I'm a mathematician. That happens to be true about me, but it also is the title of a book from 1956 by Norbert Wiener called I'm a Mathematician. He was a founder of the area of cybernetics and wrote a very important book called The Human Use of Human Beings. His claim was that mathematics was not simply a tool for the physicist or the statistician or the work of an accountant as the outside world sometimes perceives mathematics, but rather that it is a structure that it has with it the aim to solve real problems in the world. And he asks, is a poet less free because his language has a grammar and sonnets versus the mathematician that has his formal structure? Now, many gray hairs later, I have learned to see that we have taken a leap forward in this area by creating intelligent agents that have inside them the mathematical workings of a lot of tools that you and I care about. So welcome to Jeopardy! Jeopardy! Is an American television program that's been on television for many years. And I was pleased to see the competition in 2011 between Watson, IBM's program, and the two world champions in Jeopardy! It works something like this. The category is the mathematicians of the 20th century, and the answer is this 20th century mathematician wrote the 0th book on graph theory in 1926. And although Watson wasn't asked this question, his answer might have been, who was André Saint-Leger? In fact, Watson demonstrated, I think, something that people in the community have been talking about fictionally, perhaps, that one can, with today's tools, combine what we know in terms of natural language processing, hypothesis generation, and machine learning to create a system that shows the kind of collaboration that an intelligent agent might be able to perform together with humans. And today, Watson is reading material on multiple disciplines in industry and especially in healthcare in order to apply these technologies to important problems that society faces today. My belief is that it will change the way we live and work. And so I see a brainstorming session with human experts and Watson and its cousins and its spin-offs in disciplines that see broad areas and have specializations and can interact using speech understanding, speech generation, accessing huge databases and knowledge bases, bringing to the table things that the human experts combining with
the machine capabilities will be able to solve problems. Here's a simple question that you might ask. This Black American comedian portrayed a doctor on a television program titled by its own name. Here's a mathematical clue. Ha 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 ha. Okay, my concluding quotation. The world of the future will be an even more demanding struggle against the limitations of human intelligence, not a comfortable hammock in which we can lie down and wait to be served by our robot slaves. And this was Norbert Wiener in 1950. And on a perhaps positive note that he would agree with, it may be the machine that frees the human mind in order to meet new challenges in the future.
Thank you very much. So now we are late, but I think we have time for some questions. Oh, here we go.
Hello. One speaker previously talked about the huge problem of fragmentation, and another about a gap in theory. So my question is within the context of scientific fragmentation, with its solution seen as a prerequisite for resolving segmentation in practice. Regarding the beginning of your research, regarding the literature review, which fields of science were taken under consideration? For example, was international management literature included? And even more importantly, was organizational learning literature included? Because organizational learning could be in practice defined as the process that enables and taps into and manages collective intelligence. And there's a huge amount of research, more than 100 years, and there are also many tools that are being used successfully for over 30 years, most of them developed in MIT during the 80s. So were these fields included, and if not, what can be done for the continuance of this research? Thank you.
I would say, I'm just a physicist, so I'm saying this just to make it clear that it's important to define the question you want to answer, and then of course you need to bring to bear to that question anything which is relevant directly, right? So if you want to predict how an epidemic will spread in a given context, you need to bring to bear on that what we know about social networks, what we know about the pathogen, what we know about the interplay of human mobility and the dynamics of the pathogen. So I can see how if you broaden now the question and you think about social machines in general, then of course you need to bring to bear on that what we know about organizational theory, what we know about behavioral economics. And I think that there is a huge opportunity in terms of especially using and wiring into our mathematical models and predictive frameworks a huge amount of knowledge about behavioral economics, in particular when we think about engaging users. Whenever we consider spanning the digital-physical boundary and engaging humans, of course we have to stop thinking, in my case as physicist, and you need to actually use complementary knowledge that is there on how you engage people to be part of your social computation, in a sense. So I think that I agree with what you say, because it's a fact that the most progress was recently achieved in contexts where people were able to destroy walls between disciplines and to actually, but to do this in a very constructive way, like by training people at the interface and by having one community publish in journals of the other community. You really need to play this game. You really need to somehow drop the fact that one is wearing one given hat. We really need, and this entails a huge challenge also in training at large. How can we make sure that we train a generation of scientists, of researchers, that is able to work on these problems effectively. And this already requires a lot of introspection about how we train scientists today. Do we need to retain a lot of the divisions that we have now between disciplines? Yes, for organizational reasons, but we have to find ways also to make this actionable, to bring this stuff to market. I don't know whether this answers you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Of course, any of you is able to add anything if you want, but no,
I would have a quick one first. So, personally, I was not talking about the intelligence part of technology. Personally, I did not talk about the intelligence part, about collective intelligence. I was just sticking with Roberto and just picking up on the awareness. I guess it is very important to have this awareness aspect, namely to understand technology-wise what is going on. And I think, in a nutshell, the next generation ICT that we are approaching is not so much about using semiconductors, using memory, using CPUs, using high-speed networking, all the hardware stuff, all the programming. The next generation of ICT is about understanding human beings, because the services that we deliver to the individual level, also to the society, needs explicifications of models of how humans behave. And I was trying to attempt this by questioning for the formal models of cognitive capacities of human beings, but also for social capacities of human beings. Only if we have those models, we are able to build ICT. One example is attention. We are now working on attention and attention recognition, and many other researchers also do. If I look into this room here, as a human being, I have an impression who is attentive to what is going on here. Daniele is reading email, other people are in the break. So as a human being, I have sort of an assessment of who is attentive in this audience here, but I could be totally wrong. Now, as computer scientists, we have this claim of having machines being able to understand the level of attention of human beings. We have experiments with, eye tracking, with body movement analysis, with depth cameras, with pressure mats on the seats, that the body pressure somehow is an indication for the level of attention that people have. This is very, very naive, but it's the starting point of something. And towards this, we need to understand humans. And with that, that is the point of my answer here. No piece of information, no piece of literature, and the organizational learning literature over the past century is a marvelous source of information to instruct how to understand human beings. No piece of information that has ever been published by mankind can be ignored in this process in understanding humans, so as to build ICT for humans.
Yeah, my question is to do with engaging users, but specifically about the notion of consent. Consent has always been seen to be the cornerstone of privacy and autonomy and the things that you were talking about in both your talks, and well, all your talks. But many people now seem to be saying that consent and informed consent is dead, and that has been reduced, particularly in social collective intelligence systems and in pervasive and ubiquitous systems, to a kind of tick and click. Most people don't know what they're ticking to or what they're signing up to. And this is a design challenge. So I'm wondering how the panel feel we can move forward in this, because obviously you don't want to be overburdening your users with reams and reams of ways in which this might potentially damage them. So I'd value your thoughts on that.
Yes, that is a very important remark, because indeed the problem in the past was that users, or still nowadays, that the users formally give consent by just clicking somewhere, okay, but have not read the 15 pages legal clauses and thus are practically not informed. So that's also why in the upcoming or the proposed EU data protection regulation, transparency is stressed and also easily accessible policies. And I think indeed that is a challenge for the human-computer interface design. So, and also to have good privacy settings by default. So if you have privacy policies, that the default settings for the users are already privacy friendly, because usually users do not change their preferences later on, so that if they are matched with, they could be automatically matched with privacy policies, and then users could be alarmed if the privacy policy is not matching the privacy preferences. So here we also have a challenge how to set up these privacy preferences and how to have good default settings and how to adapt them on the fly according to the user's behavior. So there is also research on machine learning approaches or other approaches how to adapt them automatically so that users are not burdened with that. Then on the HEI area, I think work on privacy policy icons are very important that show very precisely how the data should be used in forms of icons that could be standardized, and also multiple layered policies that only show the most important information on top layer, like who gets the data for what purposes, and maybe some other information, so that not you have long policies of several pages, but a top layer which provides the most important information together with icons, and then the users can dig down to the to further details if wanted. So there's this is indeed very important research how to do policies usable, and how to get good default setting and so on. So indeed that is important.
Thank you, Simone.
Yes, an immediate response to consent. I think consent is the very, very least resort that we need to have in systems of this kind. But I think it is not enough at all. Having just consent, and it is always said in those privacy lectures that human beings should have the right, the sovereignty to know who is accessing the data, in which way it is being processed, etc. It was given in your presentation. But this puts the burden of understanding the use of that data to the user, and the uninformed, the non-involved person can never understand what this data is used for and how is it used for. It is also that the uses of the data are not even invented today, although the data is collected today. Tomorrow, the day after, new ideas come up on how to use that data. So there is no way, based on consent, pure consent, to solve the problem. My answer is that an ICT design has to respect human values. It must be the respect, the dignity towards the human being that ICT designer have to consider as part of one of the design process steps towards building ICT. There is no way around. Designers, ICT builders have to respect human values.
Just to add that my presentation was not misunderstood. Of course, informed consent is only one principle. Of course, purpose specification, purpose binding is very important, that what you say, data that is collected for one purpose can later not be misused for other purposes. That is also a very important legal principle. Data minimization, how to minimize the amount of data and the extent to which personal data are collected and processed is also very important. So this cannot replace informed consent, but in some situations, especially in commercial application, we have nowadays that consent is used as a legitimization. Other areas that we need, we might have law which legitimizes data processing or contracts, but surely informed consent is only one aspect. It has to be augmented with other legal principles that have to be integrated in the design. So we need indeed privacy by design, also enforcing data minimization, purpose binding, also transparencies to the end users to follow what is really happening with my data, and allowing them to request to delete data or to correct data. And the right to be forgotten, which is upcoming now also in discussion. How can you, as an end user, have means to get your data deleted, especially if it's already spread important concept for which we need also technical means to and tools for end users.
So maybe one last question there, and then we'll stop. Sorry. Please be fast because it's okay.
Going from interdisciplinary needs to need to understand. Wondering, you see that everything becomes more complex, adaptive, needs to be more user-driven, activity-driven, distributed, and at the same time I see that it needs to be radical, but it seems that the innovation that most of these distributed systems are doing push towards incremental innovations. So they are capable of managing incremental innovations. I wonder, in the experience you have, and it's for everyone, how you see a way to get over the procrastination for radical changes.
Shall I answer something? I'll give a radical answer. The radical answer might be simplicity sometimes. If you look at Google and the impact that Google has had on society or societies all over the world, the offering that they presented to the world basically was one of simplicity. That is to say, not a very, very deep model, but rather fast searching through large things, being able to accumulate things quickly, using fairly simple principles. Now, once you define those simple principles, you can then optimize them and put in more algorithms and so forth to make it that much better. But its radical nature was that it was so simple.
Thank you. So a question for one of your slides showed the logic between natural language processing and evidence-based learning, and in between hypothesis generation. So my question is, can you give real examples of machine-based hypothesis generation, or are they still essentially human interactions with machines? And just some very specific examples.
No, I don't think that any humans were involved in Watson's generation of hypotheses. It takes weighted evidence, puts them somehow together with some probabilistic formulas to create a list of possible answers, weighted, and give the top three that seem to be most likely, and then if you have a high enough probability that it's worth it, then you press the buzzer. But it was not human intervention in generating these hypotheses. Maybe it was, there was machine learning involved in gearing how it might select those hypotheses based on experience and so on, but I don't think that it was human intervention. If you're asking about at the table where the brainstorming is, and you have the computer software tools and the humans, where does the hypothesis generation of humans come from? I don't know. I'm not a cognitive scientist, but it somehow comes out of your experience. It's a different methodology, different method of generating hypotheses. Humans do it differently than machines, like in everything else in AI.
I think it's a slightly different use of the word hypothesis in daily life. So I was meaning more the generation of questions, hypotheses, which then can be tested rather than solution finding. And but maybe this is a thing to pursue.
Okay.
I'd like to stop here. Thank you very much for the speakers. Before we go, Daniele, you want to say something?
Yes, if you don't mind, also just a few words for closing the session. First of all, I hope you found the presentations and the discussion not just interesting, but actually inspiring, because this is actually our goal here today. And then I would like just to summarize with 5 things that popped up in a number of talks today, which I think represents really kind of the key messages we want to bring you home from this morning, when we will have some more material in the afternoon, of course. The first is the point of design with and for citizens and collective. Break the boundaries between technologies and the ones who are not just using it, but are actually actively part of it. The second one is the fact that research in social collective intelligence is by nature strongly multidisciplinary. And one of the things that popped up is this need to break the barrier between computer scientists and social scientists, which is kind of a call to action for people who are designing educational curricula. The third one is that we actually need radical advances in both computer science and social sciences. It's not just reusing what we need today and putting things together following a different recipe, but it's the fact that we need for some fundamental advances here. The fourth point is that when we talk about when we talk about social collective intelligence, fundamental research should go hand in hand with empirical activities. We cannot just keep a clear boundary between what people do in university labs and what is the reality, what policymakers need, what society and economy demands. We need to really do things together, which actually means that we need to kind of find a bridge between 2 of the Horizon 2020 pillars, in particular research excellence and societal challenges, because this theme of social collective intelligence is really cutting across these 2 pillars. Last but not least, we need a new methodology for running and assessing initiatives and projects. What we have today, the schemes that we have been using for the past 10 years, are really not good enough and could represent a ceiling to the innovation potential of initiatives in this field. I hope you got enough food for thoughts during the morning. Now it's time also to feed your body. So the lunch is served outside and we resume at 2 p.m. sharp.